I'm with the author, Djedefre Memnon, discussing and asking questions about the dynamic book Treasures in the Sand, which is making waves all around the world in its relentless attack on white supremacy, racism, and black ignorance. So I'm just going to fire into the first question. Tell me more about your book.
Okay, yeah, Hotep everyone. Treasures in the Sand is a sort of sat nav or roadmap through alternative history and alternative origins of human beings, centered on uh, the magnificent Kushites, who were kind of like the progenitors of all of the civilizations we like to talk about, like Egypt, Sumeria, Elam, ancient Iran, Xi'an, Shang, China. Basically, there was a pre-dynastic civilization. You could even say pre-Adamic, that goes back so far. It goes back before records began, and nobody speaks about it because it's black. So I wanted to write a book that spoke about that because I couldn't find no books that gave me vivid information about that remote period of history. So that's what Treasures in the Sun is.
It's interesting. So in your book, you mentioned the Aryan model and the ancient model. Can you break down the differences between them, please?
Yeah, and that's very important because for people that have never heard that before, the Aryan model and the ancient model is to do with Greece, because Caucasian people like to push the thought that Greece begun civilization. It is very important in regards to where civilization went after Greece had developed. But what that means, the Aryan model and the ancient model, is according to the ancient Greeks themselves, they were explicit. They told you black Africans taught us. Do you understand? So Greece was colonized from Egypt in the 1500s BC. They're happy to say that. Herodotus, Diodorus, Plato, Aristotle, they'll tell you that. But so that's the ancient model, yeah, where the ancients they'll tell you where their stuff comes from. Pythagoras spending 20 years to get into the temple of Ipet-Asut, Karnak. So that's the ancient model because they admit that their stuff comes from Egypt, their religion, their philosophies, their mathematics, even their pantheon of God, Zeus and all them is similar to Amun and them. But the Aryan model comes from modern times, which is because of the racism prevailing in our modern world. Caucasian people didn't want to admit that Greece actually started from black Africans, because then that would be saying that black Africans are responsible for the whole of European civilization. That's what you're saying indirectly. So they weren't ready for that. So they came up with this thing called a Dorian invasion. Dorians are like northern barbarian tribes in the north of Europe, and they wanted to tie themselves into the whole story. They're not happy that Greeks are admitting that they got their stuff from black people. So what they did is fabricate what's called a Dorian invasion. You will hear historians talk about it. These ton of white people that came from the north invaded Greece, which was then a Hellenic culture. The first Greek culture was called Hellenic culture. Okay, so when the Dorians came down, they merged with the Hellenic culture and it became Greece. That's the white boy story, or what's called the Aryan model. So in movies like Troy, they will leave out Memnon. He's not even a character in the movie. They've got Detroit, the movie. It's a wicked movie as well. But I call out the card is based on the Aryan model, because the main character in the story of Troy is not just Achilles. It's also Memnon, who's a black man, and they completely left him out of the movie. This, if you read Homer's Iliad or the Ethiopius, which is talking about black people like Memnon and them, this is a black king who came with an army so big they couldn't even number the army, and he was akin to Achilles, to the point where Zeus didn't even want to get involved. That's how much they admired Memnon, a black man, an Ethiopian. And in that time, Greeks used to like praise Ethiopians, like, oh, they're the most beautiful men, they're the longest living men, the gods come down off of Mount Olympus to dine with, because they acknowledge that their culture comes from Ethiopia and Egypt. Okay, but the Aryan model will leave things like that out. They will leave out the whole basis of the story and just base it around Achilles, just because they don't want to identify with anything African and to open up that Pandora's box to show you where all of their stuff came from. So they left it out. So that's the difference between the Aryan model and the ancient model. The ancient model is what the Greeks said about themselves, the truth. Okay? And the Aryan model is what you could say Hollywood does, or the modern world does, to edit out all the blackness and just make you think it's just people that look like Brad Pitt.
Thank you for explaining.